I'm Brett. I spent 30 years as a cop in Texas down on the border of Mexico, and I'm retired now, so I just started to come on here and talk about the illusion of democracy in this country, the corrupt politicians, a little nostalgia to remember times when they were much better than today. And today I thought I would tell a story that I at least feel needed to be told. It's about a hurricane back in 1967 that came in down where I'm from. I was about 5 years old, and the story's about family and what it was like back in that time to deal with a major hurricane. It can be looked up the devastation that it caused down there. This was right on the border of Mexico and Texas. Like I say, it was September of 67. And I am from a large family, and some background on the story. So, hurricanes are not uncommon down there. We had been through them before down there, and but this was a big one. It was back then your forecasting was limited, but the local news was saying it was going to be a devastating hurricane. And my grandmother and grandfather, they would always leave days before on a hurricane because my grandmother was afraid of storms, something that goes back to, I think, what I heard when she was baptized in a river. This would have been around 1910, 1920, something like that. So ever since then, she was deathly afraid of water and floods and storms. So anytime a hurricane got in the Gulf of Mexico, she would make my grandfather pack up and leave, and they would head out uh, days before the storm's expected landfall. Well, anyway, one of my uncles had a business. He was an electrician, had a electrical business, and he had a pretty sturdy house the next town over from where we lived. And he had a generator, supplies. They had everything they needed. I mean, they were prepared, and that was our plan. We were going to go stay at his place. My parents, a couple of my brothers, my sister, my two oldest brothers, they were in Vietnam. They were in the Navy. One was on a ship. I don't know where, somewhere around Italy, and the other one was on another ship. But anyway, this was during this time, and so the as a kid, and I remember bits and pieces because it was so exciting, but a lot of it's from the stories they told afterwards. But one thing I remember is back then, TV went off at like midnight. Well, as the storm got closer, the TV station stayed on all night because they wanted to give weather updates. And as a kid, that was so exciting to think about being able to stay up. And I still remember the movie was Chitty Chitty Bang Bang. They played that movie starting at like midnight, and that way they could break in with updates, the local weather guy. Well, anyway, as the storm got closer and our plan was to head down to my uncle's, we did. And again, prepared for anything. I mean, if whatever came, they had it going on. It was my uncle, my aunt, their daughter was up in Kingsville in college, and then our family. Well, my aunt's mother was a actual pioneer woman. She had come down to the valley in a covered wagon around, I'm going to say, right around the turn of the century, or right around late 1800s, 1900. I remember her when I was a kid. She always had that red can that she would spit her snuff in. I think it was a can, the metal can that back then I think baking powder came in. It was a red can with an Indian chief on it. I still remember that, her spitting in that can. Anyway, back in the 30s, she had lost her husband in a hurricane down there. A piece of tin had hit him and it killed him. So she was deathly afraid. And she was, as it got closer, she was riding my uncle, telling him, "You need to get out of here. These kids are your responsibility. And if this house can't withstand this hurricane, you're going to be responsible." And the local weather guy was coming on TV now saying that if your house can't withstand 200-mile-an-hour winds, you better leave. You can imagine, even back in the 60s, the drama. So obviously the pressure mounted, and at the last minute, my uncle and my dad, I guess they decided that we better get out. So we load up. In the car with my parents, my brother next up from me in age, and our dog. My uncle and his wife are in a car, and then one of my brothers worked for my uncle. Him and my sister were in one of the work trucks. So we headed north out of the valley. Well, by now it's already torrential rains. The bands of the hurricane are coming in, so we're getting hit with those already. So we drive through heavy rain, and we have to go up to Kingsville, and we get my uncle and aunt's daughter, my cousin from college, get her out. I remember right about that time, some water started getting into our car on the floorboard, and our dog, I remember her hopping up on the seat between my brother and I. And I still remember seeing a light, like a airport light, around the Naval Air Station. I can still remember that through the rain. Well, anyway, we ended up that night after we got her, we headed west to get away from the coast, and we ended up in a in an elementary school that had been opened for shelter. And I remember picnic tables there and a bunch of people milling around. We stayed there that night. Flood rains now. It's flooded in lots of places. We headed to San Antone the next day, and there was tornadoes up in that area because basically we drove through the hurricane the whole time. This whole time we were in it. We ended up in San Antone, and then from San Antone they got reorganized, figured out what the plan was. The hurricane had passed through the valley. Lots of different news, hard to get actual facts, kind of like it is today, on how bad it was down there. The word was it was terribly flooded. So my dad and my uncle, they decided we need to get back south so we can see what the damage is. So we headed south, and we drove through floodwater the whole time. I can still remember this even at 5 years old. We would get to heavy flooded areas, and you all you would see was water, and the highway department had put markers out like sticks with flags to mark the sides of the road. And then my uncle would walk out ahead to make sure it was passable. So there was a road there. Then we would drive through and go to the next step. And this went on for some time. Anyway, this was our way for this must have gone on for like 2 days. We probably got back on like the third day. We made it back home through all this flood water. We got back home. Our house was fine, didn't even flood. My uncle's house was untouched. Couldn't tell there had been a hurricane. There was massive flooding in our area because what had happened was up further west from us, a dam, they were afraid it was going to break. So they opened the dam and basically flooded the lower valley to protect the upper valley. And all this area is citrus fields, cotton fields, and farming. And of course, September, cotton had already been picked. So your citrus fields, some towns of population. Anyway, so we got home, everything was fine, and my grandparents, they made it back like the next day because again the valley was just terribly flooded. It was bad. The flooding was terrible, especially in cities. And that was the big story because what had happened, of course, was the panic, the last minute panic, which I don't blame them. I mean, I can still remember my aunt's mother, the stories about her just making him feel like we were all going to die if we didn't get out. So that's, here nor there. they did what they felt they needed to do. But it was quite an adventure for a young kid, and stories we've talked about with this hurricane forever. I just thought it was quite the adventure. And then the final part of this story I'll mention is the mosquitoes were obviously unbearable. If you've never been through a hurricane after it floods, especially in the south, the mosquitoes take over. Our grass had grown from the flooding, the rain. Well, back then, things were much different. I remember military planes flying over, big, huge um, twin engine jobs, military planes in formation. They flew over, and that's back when they could still use, I think it was DDT to kill the mosquitoes. Anyway, they flew over in formations. I still remember looking out the window at those planes. And after they flew over, the mosquito problem was gone. Like my brother said, he was out trying to mow the yard, and he said after those planes flew over, you couldn't find a mosquito. But anyway, we lived. I'm in my 60s now, and I guess whatever they sprayed didn't kill us, but it sure killed the mosquitoes. But that's just a little uh, trip down memory lane from a story from South Texas back in the day, back in the 60s when families still stuck together, made decisions, did the best they could, and then went from there. So, anyway, till next time, have a great day. Bye.